Hello X. I worked as a dispatcher for about 4 years. I always wanted to do something involving emergency or rescue services, and since my mom was a dispatcher years before I was born, she convinced me to apply. You have to go through many tests to make sure you can mentally handle those types of calls. I definitely felt like I was capable of doing so, and the fact that my mother encouraged it as well gave me the confidence to go through with it, and it really helped me. It is definitely not for everyone though, and I did end up leaving, as it wore on me with some of the calls that you would get. It wasn't just the build-up of calls though. I had one incredibly strange one that left me at breaking point. It was confusing and frightening, and how it was handled and brushed off made me never want to go back. I will share a couple of my worst calls with you, but I need to start with the one that made me quit. Be around 1 a.m. working a long overnight shift, not scheduled to finish until around 8 a.m. Receive a call like usual, and I pick up. I began the call like I usually would, trying to collect as much information from the caller as I possibly can to ensure that we can do everything to help. I don't get a response at all. I hear what sounds like heavy breathing, like really labored, like someone was running a 100-meter sprint while on the phone. I try my best to keep talking, thinking maybe the reception might be bad and the person cannot get through to me, but it does not work. Along with the breathing, I hear running on what sounds like some kind of gravel surface, and they are hauling ass. They sound like they are running with all of their might, and combined with the heavy breathing, it has me incredibly concerned. I just try my best to make myself heard, so that they know that I am here if they can maybe somehow hear me, so they don't hang up, and we can track the location from the phone GPS and send help over immediately. The call ends abruptly though, and that is it. Around 5 minutes go by in total before we receive a call again, and I pick up instantly. Now, in between the labored breaths, I can hear deep and heavy sobs, like when a child is inconsolable after they have been disciplined. I could hear their lip quivering, and they physically could not stop themselves from sobbing. The sounds of running on gravel were not there anymore, and I begin the call as usual again, trying to find out whatever I can. I get maybe 3 words out in total before the woman is talking at light speed, mumbling whatever word she can out of her mouth as fast as possible, only stopping for a second or two at a time to let out a large breath and to let out a slight sob. I try my best to calm her down, to reassure her that help will be on its way as fast as possible, but that I need to take information from her and that she needs to help me to help her. She is largely incoherent, but I am able to make out more words the second time around. Something about underground and held captive and more people still there, but that was all I got. I tried to ask her for her name, where she was, anything at all like that, but she kept shutting me down. She told me that she could not tell me her name. She told me that they were after her, and that if I tell you my name, then my family is dead. They will know. I am trying not to freak myself out at this point, and I am begging dispatch to get there as quickly as they possibly can. They told me that they were having serious trouble pinpointing her location, saying that it was something to do with the service and the cell towers that she was near, but that they were working on it, and that I just needed to keep her talking while they figured it out. I get her to take a deep breath, which in turn gives me a chance to calm myself down. She tells me she is being followed and that she does not know where to go. She tells me that if they find her and she goes back there, then she is dead. Just for reference, this call took place in the state of New York, but I won't narrow it down any further, just in case. I asked her for any details that she could give me, to just start from the top. I was trained to keep her talking and find out anything I could while help was on the way. I was told that they had tracked her approximate location and had sent out a car immediately and would try to track her from there. She told me something I could barely fucking believe, but I encouraged her to talk no matter what. She finally calmed down enough for me to understand her, and I convinced her to finally tell me her name, which I will not repeat here. All I will say is that when I checked after the fact, she had been reported missing by her family almost a year prior to this call, but the case was closed as no further clues or evidence could be linked to the case. She started by telling me that she had been held captive underground for the better part of the year. She told me all sorts of horrible things. She told me that these were rich and powerful people that could do whatever they wanted and get away with it. I asked her if she was safe, and she told me she was hiding in some sort of alleyway and that no one had caught up to her yet. I asked her why they had kept her underground, and she told me that she was not the only person that they were keeping down there. She told me that underneath New York, these rich and powerful people had some kind of human farm that they just kept adding to every so often just to fuck with. It started out quite small, and she was one of the first that they made their move on. She had her family threatened and was told that horrible things would happen to them if she and the rest did not comply. She told me that they would tie them up and torture them until their vocal cords were too fried and worn out to even beg for them to stop anymore. She told me that they would amputate limbs until some people were nothing more than just a torso and a head and couldn't even function properly anymore. They were basically using them as lab rats for whatever sick and twisted experiments they could think of and were just used for fun. I just kept giving mm-hms or yeses in reply, just so that she knew that I was still paying attention and was taking her 100% seriously. I didn't have any other words to offer than that. I took a look back at my supervisor multiple times throughout the call to give a look like, "Are you hearing this shit?" But they did not even look shocked. They looked nervous, panicked almost. We usually have 2 supervisors on shift, but it was not long until most of the department of higher-ups were called in and hanging off every single word that this woman on the phone said. She said it started out small, but that more and more people kept being thrown in until the place was crowded. It became so crowded that you could not even move, that all you could do was stand upright, squeezed tight against the bodies of people writhing in torment and moaning in pain. At first it was people who you wouldn't notice, the homeless, addicts who had lost everything, chronic gamblers who people would expect to disappear because of their debts, that type of stuff. After a while they just stopped caring and just took whoever they felt like. It was New York. Anything could happen and it would not look suspicious. It got so bad that it was becoming tough for the elites to perform their experiments thoroughly. They would have to toss in pieces of bread and other bits of food into the giant mass of people, and then they would watch them fight. People would bite and rip and claw each other over tiny scraps of food, and it got to the point where people would kill each other for those bits of food. That is when they started eating each other. They would fight over the food and then eat the loser. If anyone became too weak that they collapsed or died, then they became more food for the slaughter. She told me that at first, she thought that it was testing for experiments, some kind of viruses, but that after that, it just became entertainment before they just abandoned it altogether. She kept going and going, telling me about how when it was just a small amount of people, the elites would come in and inject people with weird-looking concoctions in exchange for food and other treats. She mentioned how one time, a man came in, offering a big lavish meal and chocolate for anyone willing to be the next test subject. There was a young Asian man who had a really thick accent who she thought was maybe from India. He apparently jumped at the chance and shouted over all the others and pushed them aside to be the one to be tested on. He begged them for them to let him eat just a little bit of food first, telling them that he was going to die, but they promised him that as soon as the test was done, that he could eat anything that he liked. They wheeled in some type of gurney and strapped him down and prepared something that was in a vial. They did it right in front of everyone, and they did not care. The vial had some kind of liquid, except it was too thick to be a liquid, and was tinted a sort of purplish brown color, but it was difficult to make out in the low light. They did not inject it anywhere into his arms, but instead injected it into the veins on his neck. You could instantly see the pain in his eyes as it hit, and he started screaming so loud that it echoed throughout the tunnel. He started scrambling and trying to break free, but he could not get any of his straps off. All he could do was writhe and scream as the skin around his neck started to bubble and melt until almost all of his face was peeling off. One of the men undid the straps for his hands and arms, and the young Asian man instantly started clawing at his own face. All this did was peel off more of his skin and face. It did not take long for him to die. He physically could not stop clawing and peeling away more and more of his face. They announced that it was a failure and threw the food to everyone else. She was about to tell me more, but she got really quiet all of a sudden and would not respond to anything that I was saying. She started whispering down the phone very slowly. She told me she could hear footsteps and asked me if it was the police. I looked towards my supervisor and he nodded, and I told her that help was finally there. I told her that I was going to hang up the call once she confirmed that she was with one of our officers, but she begged me to stay on the line no matter what. She told me that there was one other guy and that he was the reason she got out, but that she didn't know what happened to him. After about another 30 seconds, I heard screaming coming from the woman on the phone. All I could hear was something muffled coming from the phone speaker, and it sounded like it was broken somehow. About a minute after that, someone hung up the call. I tried calling out to her again and again, but she did not hear me or respond after the scream. I went on with my job as normal for the rest of the night. I asked about what happened after my shift was over, and the story I was told seemed suspicious in a way that I would not usually question. They told me that an officer found her in an alley, just like she said she was in, but that she was clearly high on something and screamed when she saw an officer. She apparently started fighting back and screaming at them that they were evil, and that she did not want to go back and was either clearly a druggie or a psychopath. My supervisor told me that the officers took her to the hospital to get her cleaned up, and that she passed away in the hospital from an overdose of meth not long after they dropped her off. I kept trying to press for more details from different people, but my supervisor pulled me aside and basically told me to drop it. He told me that he understood that the case was horrible and emotionally scarring, but that I was acting unprofessionally and that I needed to be able to move on and put it to one side to be able to do my job properly, or that I would be forced to go on leave and seek therapy for the stress of my job. I dropped it, but I quit after another few weeks. Something about that call and about that night just did not seem right or add up. Why would the cops not announce themselves to a scared, defenseless woman who was possibly out of her mind? I would have heard it, but all I heard was a scream. No siren sounds, no sounds of a car at all, just her scream and then some muffled sounds when she dropped her phone. I don't know what happened, and I don't think I ever will know. I'm not sure I believe all of the things that she was saying, but there was clearly something wrong with that woman, something that they aren't telling anybody, and the thought of it scares me. I got a call around midnight or so from a guy that was freaking out, saying his girlfriend was bleeding and that I needed to send an ambulance. I started getting his address and collected more information about what had happened. He said that they had been partying and he passed out, and when he woke up, he noticed that she was on the floor in the kitchen and was unresponsive. That's when he also noticed the blood on her chest and stomach. I started asking what she was last doing. I walked him through checking for a pulse or breathing and going for a few steps that we had to try and help. He seemed pretty calm but concerned. I could hear heavy breathing coming from him, but he was able to follow my instructions thoroughly. I told him to apply pressure on the wound to try and stop the bleeding, all while trying to keep him calm. Other than sounding calm on the phone, his speech also seemed to be a little slurred too, but as the call progressed, it seemed to clear up, and he started freaking out. While I was instructing him to apply pressure, I tried to get him to remember what all happened before he fell asleep. He started explaining his party, and then seemed to start noticing that the kitchen was in disarray. He said things seemed to be knocked over, and so he started to worry that someone had broken in. I asked if there was anyone else at this party, or expected to be, which he said no, but he started breathing faster, and there were occasional whimpers in his voice. I asked him to keep talking to me and tell me what was going on, when he said that he had blood on himself too. My first thought that it was probably her blood, since he was supposed to be covering the wounds, but you also have to be thorough. So I'd asked him if he noticed any wounds on himself, or if he was in any pain, and he said no, then started naming off where the blood was, including his hands, arms, chest, pants, and even socks, and that's when he started breaking down. I could hear him crying, but he was not responding to me, and when he finally did, all he said was, "I think I did it." I asked him to elaborate, and he started crying and said, "I think I killed my girl," and started sobbing once more. I tried to keep him calm, to make sure he didn't do anything dangerous, but it was not working. He was screaming that he did it, and that he did not deserve to live, and that he did not want to live without her. That's when I heard the smacking sound, like the phone was being dropped, or being laid down, and I could hear him sobbing and crying, but I was not getting a response. The police finally showed up, as I heard them confirm on the radio, and I could hear them enter the apartment. I later learned that he did in fact kill her. Sadly, the party was just the two of them, getting high on something they had never used before. He had most likely started hallucinating, and it got physical, causing him to stab her and then pass out in the living room. Unfortunately, he had to find out that he was the one to cause this and would live with it for the rest of his life. I could only hope that he somehow found peace after such a traumatic event. Some of the worst calls I got were the ones from children, and this one was actually part of the reason I ended up leaving. I got a call from a kid late one night that was just about whispering into the phone. When I first answered, I was not getting a response, but I could hear people talking in the background in sounds, like the phone was rubbing against something, like clothing or a hand, or something to that effect. We got that often, like people were trying to hide or mask the phone, so it's something that we really paid attention to. After a few callouts, I finally got a response from a little boy, who started by saying, "Is this 911?" I confirmed, and asked him what was wrong, / what he needed. He said in a calm voice that there is a man in our house, and he is scary. So I started asking him more questions like, did they break in? Did he know the man? Did he see him? What did he look like? And of course, if he was alone. Unfortunately, we've gotten calls from kids that were way too young to be left home alone, but he confirmed his mom was there, but explained that they were in the living room watching a movie when someone started banging on the door. He said she told him to go to his room and not to come out until she told him that he could, and as he walked into his room, he heard the door start to open and a man started yelling. He was scared and grabbed his mom's cell phone and hid in his closet with the phone. I was thankful that the kid was smart about it. So I asked him if he thought he was in danger or if his mom was, and again, he said he was scared because he could hear them screaming. After a while though, I could also hear the voices getting louder. We have to send someone out regardless since we got a call, but it gave more of a sense of urgency as well. The problem though was that the kid did not know his address, so while we tried to ping the cell phone to get a location, I tried to get more info from the kid, like did he know any part of the address, any familiar buildings or places nearby, and things like that. He started talking about a grocery store nearby when the yelling got louder, and I could hear a lot of crashes. The kid instantly stopped talking, and I think we were both listening to what was happening. Then the sounds got louder, and I could hear a woman yelling, "Stop," and "Please." I could also hear the kid starting to do that little whimper right before they started to cry, so I tried to get his attention to continue getting the address, but then the phone fell silent. I again tried calling out to him, when all I could hear was some thuds, like someone stomping, and then I heard a slight gasp on the line. I started to worry that this little boy had been found, but I also didn't hear him say anything either. Thankfully, we were able to get the location based on the cell phone towers and the description of the grocery store. So we had an officer on the way. I stayed on the line though, so I can make sure the kid is okay. After a bit more of a shuffling sound, I heard the kid whispering, asking if I was still there. Then he explained that it sounded like someone was trying to come into his room, so he hid in the chest that was in the bottom of his closet. So I asked him if he thought they were still there, and he said it sounded like the front door had slammed shut, and then asked if he should get out. I told him to stay there and to be safe as long as he could breathe, and to make sure that the guy was not there. He said okay, and then stayed for about 30 seconds or so. Again, this kid seemed so calm throughout this, when I would not expect a kid to be so. He then asked if he should get out, and I asked him if he heard or could see anything, to which he said he could not, and that's when I started to hear a groaning sound. I asked him if he knew what it was, and he said, "I think mommy is hurt." I told him to wait before leaving, to make sure that the man was still not there, and I again heard a groan, and then something I could not make out, and that's when the kid said, "She said Smarty, that is my nickname." I again tried to ask if he knew if the man was gone, but I did not get a response. I just heard the shuffling again, and I could hear the groaning louder, but no response from the kid, and now I can hear her calling out Smarty. She definitely sounded like she was in pain, and probably crying, and that's when the kid picked up the phone again and said mommy's bleeding, and I'm scared, and I don't know what to do. So I had to walk this 6-year-old through finding where his mom was bleeding, which turned out to be her face and head, and walk him through grabbing a towel to stop the bleeding, but explained to him not to move her head in case she broke her neck or something. For being scared, I had never talked to a more calm child. He sounded like he was going to cry, but he never did. He stayed focused the whole time. He said he heard the cops show up, and he let them in, and then the call ended. Luckily, my friend's husband was one of the police that showed up, and he told me the mom had a few broken ribs and an eye socket fractured, but she lived, and said that it kind of tugged at him too, because even when they arrived, he was quick to lead them directly to his mom and explain what had happened, and he did it without crying a bit. This kid had seen something like this before, maybe not as bad, but the fact that his mom told him to go to his room and he grabbed the phone and then stayed calm told me everything. Turns out that the guy that did this was an ex-boyfriend of his mom's too. At the time of the last call, I had just come back from maternity leave, and those few months back seemed to be the worst. Anytime I got a call about a child or a spouse calling for their spouse, it really messed with my head, so I had to quit. As a dispatcher, you get to hear some really disturbing and high-pressure calls. I was thankful that I did well under pressure and on time crunches, but it's definitely not for everyone. The worst ones for me were the abductions and kidnappings, because it is always a critical situation, as you don't know what the person's intentions are, so you have to get the information as fast as possible. Sadly, there were also times where the caller is unable to talk, or does not know where they are, so you have to try figure out by clues they may give, or by tracking them. One of the worst ones I heard was a girl getting abducted while she was on the phone with me. I got a call around 9 or 10 at night, right about when your sit-in restaurants were closing for the evening. The girl said she was walking home from work at a local restaurant, and she thought that she was being followed. I asked her to explain where she was, and she started to give me the intersection, and then proceeded to tell me that she was going to take the bus, but was feeling uncomfortable about the guy that had approached the stop, so she had decided to walk away, but the man continued to follow. She said that she had stopped at an intersection and crossed before the light turned for her to see if he would follow, and he did. I asked if she knew what he looked like, but she said all she could tell was that he was white and had a short beard due to the hood that he was wearing. I told her that I had some units on the way and tried to get as much information as possible in case something happened, and that's when I started to hear a scream. It's never expected, and it never gets easier, but you have to remain calm and still try to talk to the person or listen for more information. All I could hear were things like, it's him, somebody please help me, let me go. Honestly, the screams never go away in your head, and then I heard a crashing or scraping sound that I would later learn was the sound of the phone falling to the ground. Her screams sounded further and further away, and then I could hear a car speeding off. Since it was a cell phone though, and she had given me the intersection nearby, we were able to get the cops there quickly. But sadly, They only found the phone nearby. I was devastated. However, I later on learned that we did have a good Samaritan that called in because he had heard screaming outside from the apartment complex he lived in, and he saw a woman being forced into a vehicle. He ran outside to try and stop them, but they were already driving off. But he did manage to get the type of car and most of the license plate. We were able to track down a vehicle not long after matching the description that was speeding on the highway. They ended up exiting and nearly wrapping the car around a light post and then fled from the vehicle. One guy was caught, but there was apparently a second one that got away. Thankfully, they did find the girl in the back seat, unconscious due to the wreck. She turned out okay, but it was all a terrifying moment for both of us. Another one I remember was where the girl had already been abducted, and she managed to call us without the person knowing. This actually occurred around midday. I answered and immediately did not get a response. It sounded like the phone was in a pocket or something, like you would do, trying to muffle the phone or hide it, and that's when I started hearing someone talking very quietly. I could make out, "Please, just let me go. I won't say anything. If anyone asks, I'll say I didn't see your face. I didn't know who it was." And then I could hear someone responding, and it would occasionally get louder, like they were getting closer, or shouting maybe, saying, "No, you're lying. You already wanted me locked up. It's not fair. I just want to see my baby girl again." So it was sounding like a domestic case here already, and they tried to reason with him, and this is where they started getting smart. They said something like, "I can talk to the caseworker and tell them you're doing better, that you have your own place. If it's not too far, I could just bring her over myself, and we're still in," and then she named the local city. The guy answered though. He said, "No, we're in the name of another city nearby." Okay, so we're narrowing down a location. Great. Unfortunately, we were only getting a ping from one cell tower, so we were having troubles narrowing down an area, so she would end up helping us with that too. Then he started screaming again about how she was lying, and I could hear a smacking sound and a muffled yelp. Then I'm not sure if he was just talking and not making full sentences, or if I was just hearing pieces of the conversation again. But I heard something about, "If you're missing Kaylee, live with me, and then you need to disappear." Then she started begging him to be reasonable here, and she told him to calm down, so his neighbors in the apartment next to him didn't hear him yelling. So we knew they were in an apartment complex. Then things started to head south. I heard him yelling about a phone. Then I heard, "Where is it?" She said she hadn't seen it, and mentioned her phone being left at her place, and that maybe he left it there as well. Then she suggested he stay calm, and go across the street to the FedEx and ask to use their phone, and she promised to stay and answer it when she found it. So now we had a city, an apartment complex, across from a FedEx. We were able to narrow it down pretty quickly, and I matched up with the towers, so we started sending units to the location, and that's when he started to get louder and meaner again. He called her a liar. I heard something crashing, and then she started screaming. She started using his name, saying, "Stop, please don't do this." And then I could hear, "Can't breathe," and heavy gasping. Then he found the phone. He said hello, and all I could think was to say hello back. Then he screamed no. There was a loud smashing sound, and then the call ended. I tried calling him back, but it just went to voicemail. But he said his name in the voicemail too, which did confirm his name. I was worried about the woman's safety, since I had no idea what happened, but I heard them call for paramedics, and the description sounded similar to the call that I got, and it was later confirmed to me that it was the same place. She survived though, but I know she had some pretty serious injuries too. There were plenty of others that I got about stalkings or abductions that I did not get a resolution on, and they tear you up knowing that you may have been the last person they talked to. The state that I'm in also has some of the highest abductions in human trafficking, so it's always something on my mind. All I can tell you is try to be aware of your surroundings, and if any part of you feels like something is off, report it. Don't go somewhere alone. Tell someone. Call 911. Just something. If anything, those people can offer to help, or at least try to track your phone. Just take care of yourself and your fellow neighbors.